it's always nice to know that the people you're speaking to know less about a topic than you do, even though you thought you didn't know that much. So very good. Thank you all. So it is a great pleasure to be here today and to have an opportunity to talk to you about what I actually think is a wonderful technique that can be incorporated into the curriculum of medical schools, residency programs, and in fact, postgraduate, graduate medical education. What I'll be doing today is I will be briefly defining for you appreciative inquiry, what it is. I will describe the essential components of it, particularly the so-called 4D cycle and the core principles of AI that really drive this technique. And what I'll spend most of my time talking about is how we might apply appreciative inquiry methods to medical education at the different levels. And you'll see I'll give you examples of how this has been used and is currently being used by a growing number of medical schools to enhance both student and resident education, but also as a tool, as a technique for faculty development. So the reason that I am giving you this talk is because Missy McNeil, who's not here, where is that? Where is she? Because Missy McNeil asked me to do so because she realized that I had moved here last year from Case Western Reserve University, which is really where this technique has been developed over the last several decades. Actually, out of the School of Management at Case Western Reserve University. And Case Medical School and Cleveland Clinic over the years have used AI appreciative inquiry techniques to enhance the quality of their patient care and their healthcare delivery. So what is this appreciative inquiry? First of all, understand that this was not ever developed to be an educational technique or tool. It actually comes from the management world. So it was developed to be applied to management in large organizations. And most of the work, and virtually 90% of the publications in this field, have been in business, not in education. But to fully appreciate how this business model of organizational change can apply to medical education, please forgive me as I'm going to walk you through the concepts, the techniques, and some of the uses of appreciative inquiry in the non-medical education world. So it is very succinctly defined as the study and exploration of what gives life to human systems when they function at their best. So I don't really need to say much more. I think at this point you've got a very good understanding. Again, this is organizational theory now being transformed into medical education theory. But it was first developed by David Cooperrider and his colleagues at Case Western Reserve in the School of Management. It has become fashionable in recent years among medical schools, particularly at Indiana University, as well as at the University of Virginia, to apply the appreciative inquiry principles to education. And Tom Inouye at Indiana University has been one of the strong proponents of this. And of course, Tom is one of the senior academic internists and researchers in the United States. And Tom looks at it this way: it's an organizational change strategy that focuses on the question of what is right and how we can get more of it, and not what is wrong with an organization and how we can fix it. So how did I come across appreciative inquiry several years ago in Cleveland? We had some issues that involved transitions of care between hospitals and our skilled nursing facilities in the metropolitan Cleveland area. And there was a good deal of concern raised by the medical directors of the nursing homes, the attending physicians. We have to do a better job. So one of the facilitators, the consultants from the Weatherhead School, worked with us to organize a CME program for these practicing physicians on using appreciative inquiry. And so there I was suddenly, and to my surprise, an overnight expert in appreciative inquiry. But it was a wonderful idea. What we said is, let's look at what we're doing well in care transitions and see how we can build on that. So we had a small group of physicians. We only planned for about 25 physicians. The plan would be to break up into small groups, and the individual physicians would exchange stories, very important and provocative examples of things that worked well. Not bad, but worked well, particularly in care transitions. It may have been in terms of how they communicated with the referring physicians, the information they received, how they could collaborate and connect with their own nursing staff and the like. But the point was to look on, if you will, the positive side, and then develop, as the CME course progressed, questions to ask on how we can move from what we saw that works reasonably well to a dream or a vision of how it could be close to perfect. So that's really what appreciative inquiry is. Just as Inouye says, you start not with what's broken, but what's working well, and you go forward to make it even better. The business model that was developed that is now coming to medical education starts with the 4D cycle, and I'll show you an illustration of that in a moment. What it does, basically, it guides conversation. It gets people to speak to one another about what's great, what examples they have of what worked well, of how they feel good about their collaborative relationships with people, about how they self-reflect to find better solutions to problems. The focus is always on positive change, not looking at negative, once again, but on positive change. Now, one can imagine there would be a limitation if you have a serious problem, like a dysfunctional operation, or in the case of medical education, if you have a sociopathic resident in your program, you probably can't be too positive about that. But the assumption is that even as you're dealing with some of those more critical issues in your system, and in business that might be that you're dealing with antiquated equipment, for example, or you're running into some financial barriers, at the same time there are good things going on in your organization that you can build on. So always you think about the organization at its best. The basic concept, just to kind of briefly summarize this point, is you ask the questions about what we're doing well, what our vision is for being the best we can be, and then asking the questions of how we get there. And then finally, how do we celebrate what we're doing, to appreciate, literally, how well we're doing, and to constantly think about new ideas, to have the freedom, if you will, to think very openly, creatively, without embarrassment that your ideas may be considered ridiculous. So what are the lessons from business? So let me just kind of walk you through examples that have been discussed in the appreciative inquiry literature. So we're looking at a large or successful corporation. 2 years previously, this company was making huge profits. It was doing so well that it decided that it needed to expand its operations, and in order to do that efficiently, it decided to set up some subgroups, departments, specifically 6 different departments that would kind of focus on one aspect of the business operation. And what they found over the next couple of years after doing this is that there was, in a sense, a silo created between these 6 departments. People weren't talking to each other, and therefore there was sort of a competitive and a suspicious relationship that developed between these departments. Coincidentally or otherwise, the productivity began to decline. Employees began to sense that morale was poor. People were starting to leave their positions. The financial status of the organization, the corporation, was declining. And the company that had been highly successful just 2 years earlier was now in financial dire straits and wondering what's going on and what to do. They consulted with the Weatherhead School. Consultants came out, worked with them, and they transformed the culture in this business environment. And what they did is they basically started with the fundamentals. They had leaders coming together. They shared stories, not of what's wrong and how to fix it, but what's been good about this organization, what's been successful, what's even working right now. They talked to the opinion leaders, the managers, and in the process, they took these people and trained them to become interviewers themselves. So it's train the trainers, a good example of that. In the process, they selected what has been termed affirmative topics. This is key to AI, appreciative inquiry. You don't just talk about random things. You talk about really core principles and those topics that are relevant to your core principles. So if you're in business, you're looking at productivity, efficiency, output, profits, and so forth. And medical schools and in residency programs might be looking at something very different. The point was to uncover and bring forth existing strengths, hopes, and dreams from the leadership, and by doing so, transform the entire organization, from top of the leadership down to the lowest level of employee. Now, this is a dramatic, actually, cultural change in business operations, if you think about it for a moment. In most management courses, books, and so forth, the focus is on deficit-based change. For example, you identify the problem, and then you do problem solving. You select certain people, usually the key individuals. This could be your board of directors, or it could be the department chairman if we're looking at a medical school. You sit down and you say, things are broken here. What are we going to do to fix it? And we better do it quickly. You then give some feedback as you go along to the decision makers on how things are going. You sit down again, you brainstorm alternatives. You might try this or that. And then you come up with what you think is the best solution. It's actually an example of what we do in quality improvement. Identify a problem, figure out what's wrong, try to see if we can fix it. With positive change, it's very different. The focus is on affirmative topics. What do we do well, and how we can build on those areas that we're doing well. It involves the whole organization, not just a few people. It may take time, and there may be steps in the process of getting to the whole organization, but it's not left just simply to the leaders at the top of the administrative organizational chart. And as it develops, there's a creative sharing of best practices, that dream of a better world, and then most importantly, the design to realize the dreams and to sustain them. Because it's one thing to think big, to have great vision, to have great optimism. It's another to implement and sustain any program. So this is a summary of the 4D cycle. It begins by understanding what your affirmative topic is. What are your priorities? But based on this, based on your positive core, your core principles. The first is the discovery, which is really what I'm going to talk about most as we go along. To appreciate what is good about the organization. Then dream, which is to imagine what might be. That's your vision of the future, how good you can be. The design is the methods of how you're going to get there and to determine what you should be looking for. And then the destiny, which is to create what will be and to appreciate literally the accomplishments of the individuals in the organization. So there are basic principles of appreciative inquiry. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly, but I think it's helpful to see how they play into medical school educational curricula as well and residency programs. There's the so-called constructionist principle, which is based on the concept that words create worlds. What we say in turn causes us to focus on the continuing ideas and building up of better ideas. So you change a relationship you have with employees, or in the case of faculty, physician, student relationships, trainees, you change the relationship with your trainee by talking to them and asking them questions and finding out how they feel about what's working and what they feel personally is a rewarding experience in their training. There is the simultaneity principle, which is that inquiry itself is an intervention. The change will result when you ask the questions, when you seek information about what works. I like this one, the poetic principle. I'm not so good at being a poet, but when you read the literature on appreciative inquiry, it reads like poetry. There's metaphors, quick little statements about how we are good. We are at our best when we work together, things of that sort that are kind of touching and make people immediately connect with one another. And then the anticipatory principle, which is basically imagery. So you imagine what the medical school could be like or what the residency program can be. And that inspires action, and the more positive the image, the more positive the action. Cooper Ryder describes the constructionist principle this way. It conceptually underlies the other principles in AI, and really in medical education that's been the case. Its essential premise is this: life experience doesn't just happen to us, we actually create it together. Sort of like we are what we eat, we are what we talk about. So if we talk about positive things, we become positive people. The poetic principle suggests that pasts, presents, or futures are endless sources of learning, inspiration, or interpretation, precisely like, for example, the endless interpretive possibilities in a good piece of poetry or a biblical text. So we learn from metaphors, from stories, mores, from historical documents about what we can do to improve our system. The simultaneity principle rests on the power of inquiry and suggests that change begins the moment we ask a question. Very much what I said about discovery. Inquiry and changes are simultaneous. The minute we ask the question, change begins. That's why the process begins with interviews and questions. Key point, it always starts with interviews and questions. Not dictates from on top down. Okay. Then the anticipatory principle suggests that the images we create in our minds about the future guide our present actions and create that very future. That is visionary thinking. And again, it's you are what you think you are. So just summarize the key points from this business model. The AI process does not focus on problems or issues that look at failure or what is wrong. Instead, the focus is on what has worked, what is currently working, and what is going well. Before I move on, I want to mention one other, the positive principle, and that is that the momentum for change requires a large amounts of positive affect and social bonding. So there has to be some empathy, some sensitivity to other people, to their positions and their needs. And there are numerous examples of how that happens both in business and in medical education, and I'll kind of allude to this near the end. So let me turn to medical education. An appreciative inquiry in medical education, I think, can be summarized by this slide. Okay. So you're looking at a glass, right? My question to you is this cup half filled or half empty? So under traditional management theories, it's half empty because it's not as good as it could be. But in appreciative inquiry, it's half filled, and by the end of the process of appreciative inquiry, it will be full. That's the vision. So let's take a look at medical education and the employment of AI. Primarily, if you look at the literature, it has been used to transform professionalism in the medical school. It really is most strongly focused on professionalism. It applies probably to other core competencies, but most of the data has been looking at professionalism issues. Dr. Ploos-Ogun, Peg, has been one of the strong advocates and is really considered, in terms of application of this in medical education, the leader in the United States. She loves this, she breathes this, and she's spread it throughout the University of Virginia, and I'll come back to that in a moment. It advances a multidisciplinary collaboration, essentially creates a community in which everybody collaborates, works together, tries to get along, appreciates each other's point of view, and works together to make the institution the best it can be. Again, stories are important, the questions are important, and the individual AI focuses on self-awareness and reflections. So the stories are of empathy, understanding what it's like to be a patient, to understand the strains of being a mother of a child who has a leukemia, or the 50-year-old mother or daughter of a mother who has Alzheimer's disease. Putting yourself in their place and understanding their situation, and then through that and your own self-reflection, becoming a better physician. So what it amounts to is that with these various stories, one gets these goosebump moments, as Dr. Ploos-Ogun calls it, goosebump moments. It also could be one of those aha moments, which is what I usually think about, which is when someone gains the insight into what it's like to suffer, to be sick, or on the positive side, what it takes to become fully competent and proficient in your profession. Three schools in particular have been very vocal about their appreciation of appreciative inquiry and have published some work in this field. As I mentioned a moment ago, the University of Virginia has really gone full scale with appreciative inquiry. Indiana University to a large extent, but certainly not to the great extent that Virginia has. And even the University of Washington, very different kind of model of applying AI. One of my former role models is David Leach, who was at the University of Virginia. And I would like to read this quote. It is said that people resist change. And you can understand that a cultural shift from half empty to half full is a real medical education shift. He says that my own experience is that people are attracted to change. People want to understand the truth, to help patients and residents, and most of all, to do something creative and even beautiful. Transitions are hard, but change is not. Getting from here to there is hard, but upon arrival, life can be better than ever. And that is really kind of the religion of appreciative inquiry, and that kind of message permeates everything you read in this field of appreciative inquiry. Okay, so before I talk about those three programs for a moment, I'm going to jump ahead, and I'm going to point out my own flaws. All right. So here's an example of formative feedback. Maybe you don't have the same style that I have, but the typical thing, and I've abbreviated this feedback session, is you're giving some formative feedback to student or resident, maybe even a fellow, maybe even your postdoc if you're in research. And you always start off with the positive. Well, you're doing a great job interviewing those patients, Bill, and writing up your notes. Wow, you're really coming along. And then the but comes in. But you could be going into more detail about the differential diagnosis, and you could spend some time dealing with pathophysiology. It's sort of like my wife says, hey, your jacket and your tie are very nice, but you could brush your hair, and your shoes aren't polished, and it would be nice if they were. And by the way, there's a little spaghetti stain on your tie. Oh. So why is that relevant to medical education? And you probably already know this better than I. Because what does the trainee actually hear when you say these things to him or her? What they actually hear might be the positive message, doing a great job on your interviewing, or it could be the negative. So I'm being anecdotal for a moment. In my experience, having counseled residents and students by the hundreds in my career, they almost always hear the negative. And they focus on the negative, and they ignore the positive. This is not AI that we're doing if we're using this technique. Now, again, that may be me. Maybe I'm the only one who starts off with the positive and then goes to the negative. Maybe some of you never even get into the negative. You just start building from the top. It would be something like this. Bill, you're doing a great job interviewing patients, writing up your notes. What do you think you could do to even make it better? What's your dream or what's your vision for what you as an interviewer could be doing? And how are you going to get there? What's going to make you even better than you are right now? Do we say that? I'll tell you, when I'm in my better moments, my AI moments maybe, I do. But most often, I got to hit home with what they're doing wrong. And I feel like, well, don't I have to bring out what's wrong? Well, I suppose you have to. But it's how you phrase the question or how you phrase the recommendation that makes it AI and not usual educational techniques. So I had the opportunity to be a physician advisor at the medical school at the Cleveland Clinic, which was a Case Western Reserve University program. And as an advisor, I met frequently with my medical students year 1 through 5. And what I found was that our school, which was very self-reflective, students really had no grades, they didn't take exams, they basically evaluated themselves. The form that they used had 2 columns. On the left was targeted areas for improvement, and on the right was strengths. Okay? Can I tell you that they were to fill out the form before meeting with me? They could do it on, of course, through the website or in writing. There's hardly anything on strengths. All of the discussion was what I'm doing wrong and how bad a student I really am. And you know what? I tried to turn it around, being sort of an AI advocate here, right? Okay. Well, tell me about your strengths. Well, I mean, I'm doing okay, but you know what? I'm not sure I'm learning the pharmacology. I'm not sure I'm keeping up, and actually I'm not sure I know anything. And I don't even know if I'm going to graduate from the school. We don't have tests. We don't have exams. We don't get grades. I don't know if I'm any good. Okay. Well, wait a minute. Now, what are you doing well? Well, you know, okay, I did this presentation at the, you know, the journal club. You know, it was good. But you know what? I mean, the other students did. So it was always negative, negative. And so I realized that if you really want a student to feel good about himself, herself, or any trainee, if you start with the strengths and then you ask the AI type questions, well, you're doing very well. You did a great job on your PowerPoint presentation. You know, you actually did a good job. Believe it, all right? Don't question it. So what did you learn from that experience? How could you be better? What was the crowning achievement in your doing this? And how did you do it so well? What worked for you? Those are important questions. What worked, not what didn't work. So big difference. But as I say, trainees usually focus on the negative. So building on strengths is really what we should be doing. You start with the strengths and then you build on them, and hoping that the students have that aha moment. Now that you mention it, now I realize that what I did really did make a difference. I went to the library, I talked to experts in the field, and I actually knew what I was talking about. What a great thing, what a great way to learn. That's what worked. So what we're doing then is we're using that basic 4D of discovery, asking questions, and by asking questions, discovering answers to those questions that build on strengths. So Jennifer Bloom wrote this, and I thought it was a really nice summary, especially for those of us who do advise trainees. The first is, believe in the goodness of each trainee. You know, it's easy to say that. We love our students, but sometimes we get down on them because they're not performing at the level we want. Hey, you know, I'm a parent, and I've been that way with my children. So treat your trainees as if they're your children. Love them, nourish them. Don't literally love them, I guess, but you know, pay attention, care about them, and show that you do care about them. And importantly, when you talk to them about their performance, always keep the questions open-ended so that you can elicit the trainee's strengths and passions. That's the discovery part of this. Questions, questions. You can help the trainee formulate a vision of what they may become. That's the dream. And give trainees a clear idea of devising achievable goals. We have to be realistic. If the person has a drippy personality, maybe research is what they should go into. But also, if they love technical procedures, maybe interventional radiology is their future. It isn't for us to tell them what they should do. It's for us to help them to achieve their goals in their career. And of course, like our own children who stumble occasionally, we have to support our trainees and help them to refine and update their dreams. It's kind of that iterative process of getting where you want to your destiny. So let me turn at this point to the example of the medical school at the University of Virginia. As I mentioned, they have really gone into this in a serious way. It all began with a bad incident. The ACGME some years ago placed the residency program in internal medicine on probation. And it forced everyone to ask questions like, what are we doing wrong? Part of this was that the residents themselves were unhappy with the program. That permeated through everything. The medical center was unhappy with the residents. The medical students were unhappy with the strained relationships between nursing, the residency, and also nursing departments. So there was really a mess that involved more than just educational programs. It was with the medical center itself. So the question is what to do to change this culture of negativity into a culture of positivity. At that time, they turned to Cooper Ryder's group in Cleveland to help them to address the needs of both faculty who are trying to figure out how to change their curriculum to make it better, and employees who were so unhappy and, as I was alluding to, were complaining bitterly. And what they created was essentially a partnership of the medical school and the medical center to attack these issues head on. And following the precepts of AI, they assembled a leadership team. They had the consultant from they had a consultant, I should say, from Indiana University, which had been really thinking about appreciative inquiry for quite a bit of time. And they started with a workshop inquiry. They created in this workshop an environment of optimism, positive thinking, collective intellect, asking questions, what's good, what's working, how can we do better, inspiration and teamwork that would result in people coming forward as leaders and mentors in this transformational change to appreciative inquiry. So when they started, they had over 20 faculty, residents, and students at a retreat. The retreat went on for a couple of days. They collected appreciative stories from their colleagues, and if I don't talk too much, I'll give you an example of one at the end. They had interviews that were focused specifically on graduate medical education. They eventually collated over 100 stories from the faculty and students who participated in this. And they had another retreat in 2007. This time they brought in nursing, even the health sciences librarian, and other departments. Peggy tells me they even have interventional radiology involved in their AI process. So they have stuck with it since then. And this is a dynamic process. One of the problems with AI is it's not easy to describe it or evaluate it because it's constantly changing. It's really an example of continuous quality improvement in medical education. But they've stuck with it. It is now considered a culture change for the health system, and they've created what's called a Center for Appreciative Practice that all of the departments and even all of the deans subscribe to. There are examples of their projects on the website. I didn't bring in the website information for you, but you go to University of Virginia or Appreciative Inquiry, it'll come right up. And interestingly, they have new stories each year, and these are passed on. And the whole concept is to promote this idea of being at our best and using the 4D cycle to continuously work towards being at our best, and again, using these guiding principles that I summarized with you. It's very interesting because Peggy said that what they're doing now is that the students themselves had come up with these stories. They published the stories in a booklet. And each incoming class of students is given a copy of this book. And each class is asked to contribute new stories so that the next generation of the publications eventually will be probably too thick to disseminate. So the students are basically the instructors to the future students. So it continues to snowball at the University of Virginia. The other place that I mentioned that has really been supportive of AI has been the Indiana University School of Medicine. And this has been described in fair detail in SGIM in 2004. So they began with actually developing an informal curriculum. This is the AI curriculum that teaches professionalism. And they introduced this at the same time they had changed their curriculum into a new formal curriculum looking at 9 competencies. Among those were communication and professionalism, the targets, if you will, of the AI. They then went through the AI process. They had a discovery team, which included 13 students plus consultants from the Weatherhead School. They had faculty involved. All of this to try to identify the best elements of the current curriculum to play on that. Now you might ask why, and I'll show you a slide in just a couple minutes. They were having trouble. The students were not happy with the curriculum, so they knew something had to be changed. So to do this, they interviewed one another, this discovery team. They came up with stories, and the stories were then placed in 3 themes of discovery: meaningful experiences, exemplary collaboration, and being entrusted with important responsibilities. So if you can think about it from a student's point of view, if you give a student responsibility, you trust them to do that, and they do a good job, wow, what an ego boost that is for them, and what a great learning experience. If you can get along with nursing personnel or with your fellow students, and you work together on a project, it's like fighting a war on the front line. You're buddies forever. You figured out how to win the battle, and you'll never forget that meaningful experience. The discovery team conducted 80 interviews with a broad spectrum of voices, again, in terms of academic leadership, top to bottom. And when they summarized their themes, they actually presented this to an open forum that was attended by faculty as well as trainees. The interview themes were believing in capacity for people to learn and grow, the importance of connectedness. I kind of alluded to this already, but looking at the student-faculty relationship and even the patient-clinician relationship, how we relate. So empathy, sensitivity, appreciation for the uniqueness of the individual background and individual's contribution to the care of patients. They really capitalized on the concept of role models and the passion that role models have for medicine, which are very inspiring, and then really the big picture of the wonderment of medicine. You know, when you consider what an honor it is for us as physicians to be able to take care of people of all backgrounds, all works, of all socioeconomic status, to see and learn from life's experiences by taking care of patients, wow, what an experience. That is the kind of thinking that went into the informal curriculum at the Indiana University. And what they've observed, and again it's very qualitative, not quantitative, is that there were deepening connections between the interviewers and the interviewees. They became buddies. Whether it was a student with faculty or residents, they became closer to one another. And when they saw each other in the hallways, they would wave and talk to each other. They were buddies. Even the chief residents got into this. That's a pretty good accomplishment. They were asked to reflect on when they felt, quote, on top of their game, their best moment, what made them really good physicians, and in turn, role models for the other trainees, the students. So the collegiality grew, and the faculty themselves then planned to use appreciative storytelling in their mentoring groups. A follow-up publication shows that they didn't stop there. In fact, AI was a very important part of an organizational culture change, which they now call Relationship-Centered Care Initiative. Has anybody heard of this? Yeah. So it's probably still not widely disseminated. They published pocket-sized volume of student narratives, just like Virginia did. They even altered their interviews to make them more AI-oriented, and they put these processes into place at the dean's office. They then coached medical leaders through committees, and they taught values and professionalism everywhere they went, and eventually it percolated throughout the institution. And what did they see at Indiana University? It's kind of interesting. I abridged the figure here. This is the AAMC graduation questionnaire that is asked of medical students upon graduation in terms of satisfaction with the quality of their education. And you're looking at the percent of students who strongly agreed or agreed that this was a very good, high-quality experience. And you can see that in 2002 in orange, IU was below the national average, was actually below 80%. About the same in 2004 when they initiated this AI project. And over 2005, and I'm showing you 2006, tremendous increase in the scores, the agreement satisfaction with the quality of education, and they even exceeded, as you can see on the right, national averages. At the University of Washington, they've incorporated AI in a very different way. They've put a focus on continuous professionalism improvement. Nice term, continuous professional improvement. And they use three theories from business and leadership, systems-based thinking, so that's more of the health system approach. For their third component, psychological and organizational development, they used AI, focusing on strengths, looking at solutions, and fostering enthusiasm and positive regard for the process. And they build on role models. They shifted their focus again from problems to possibilities, very much an AI perspective. And they looked at the good in the system so much, the idea was that if you look at everything that's good, you'll sort of squeeze out discussion of what's bad. So the idea is that good will win out over bad, good over evil. And that the choices will help to build alternatives within an institution. So that has been going on, and they're very enthusiastic about it, but I don't have any good quality quantitative data to present to you, but there's a sense at Washington that the AI approach as part of this professionalism intervention is an important component. Finally, let me turn to a recent publication by Krasner and JAMA. This is a little bit more than just AI. There was a concern about physician burnout. As we all know, if you're in a primary care field, there's been a lot of burnout among practicing physicians, and even medical students seem to be burned out about the problems of primary care, forms, unhappy patients, poor reimbursement, and the like. And so they decided, let's see if we can attack this through a CME program, and this was at the University of Rochester in New York. So they developed a CME program to address the loss of meaning and lack of control in practice. That's basically their definition of burnout. And they try to emphasize greater mindfulness, thinking about who I am, what I'm doing, what my relationship with patients might be. The course was extensive, and it was based on 3 techniques. I won't really go into detail about mindfulness, meditation, and narrative medicine, although it's similar, the narrative medicine, to appreciative inquiry. Their hypothesis was that these techniques of intensive training, the 3 that I just mentioned, will help physicians to achieve better thoughts about themselves and to improve their attitude towards patient care, and will objectively demonstrate a reduction in psychological stress and symptoms of burnout, and will help to promote physician relations with patients. So they offered this CME course to all PCPs in the metropolitan Rochester area. Not all came, I can assure you. They used this very intensive program. Initially, there were 8 weekly sessions that were 2.5 hours in length, and they included 1 7-hour session, all-day session. Thereafter, they had monthly meetings for 2.5 hours for 10 months as kind of a maintenance program. And the training intervention included didactic materials, this formal mindfulness meditation, which you can read, and narrative and appreciative inquiry. So let me just show you some of the things they did with the didactic and narrative and appreciative inquiry themes. I don't know how well this projects in the back. The didactic topic, for example, is awareness of pleasant or unpleasant sensations, feelings, or thought. The response was to write or tell a brief story about a pleasant or an unpleasant experience during clinical work and its effect on the patient-physician relationship. Looking at perceptual biases and filters, a surprising clinical experience, one that differed significantly from what you expected. Addressing burnout specifically, and experiencing of noticing and responding to your own emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and low sense of personal accomplishment. In other words, being so reflective that you admit that you had an issue with burnout. Very difficult thing for physicians to normally stop and think about. Finally, meaning in practice, a clinical encounter that was meaningful to you, what made it meaningful, and what personal capacities did you have that contributed to the meaning. There's others like boundaries or conflict management in your relationships with patients or with your own staff. Attraction in the clinical encounter, something that we rarely talk about, is were you attracted to a patient in some way, and how did you deal with that? Self-care, what have you done when you've had to face choices about caring for yourself as opposed to caring for others? And I can tell you how many times that comes up in our 12, 13-hour day where we sacrifice ourselves and our personal lives, maybe even our families, for our patients. How do we deal with that? What's good, and what lessons have we learned from that? And then finally, being with suffering or end-of-life care, an encounter that really made you think about sadness, about pain, uncertainty, and made you more aware of your role as a physician. They did an enormous bit of methodology in this study to look at outcomes. And I won't go through all of these measures for you, plus I don't know enough about them myself. They looked at 6 different instruments to try to measure outcomes as a result of this course. And remember, they did this over a period of time. They actually had 5 sets of questionnaires. And there was a huge concern about respondent burden, but most of the physicians were willing to participate in the inventories. Out of over 7,000 PCPs, 70 did enroll in the study, and most of them did complete the surveys at most of the time points. What they found was this mindfulness that I didn't discuss very much, but really it's thinking about who I am and how I practice. The scores were significant. The burnout inventory improved, particularly on 3 subscales. The belief scale improved, and even the emotional measure, the POMS, showed moderate effect sizes. So they concluded that primary care physicians had, from this course, improved personal well-being, improved mood, and more empathy for their patients. So let me come back to applying AI in education, and I'll express my own biases. I think that doing this at an institutional level is wonderful. It takes years, and it certainly takes top-down commitment from the dean and all department chair. But we as individual educators, whether in research, medicine, pediatric surgery, it doesn't matter, we can apply these principles in one-on-one settings and in small groups. We can also do it at the admissions committee level, which has been done at Indiana University. We can focus on professionalism. Some have said we should focus on civic duties. This was a passion of the dean at the Case Western Reserve University. What are we doing for our society, and how can we do a better job, and what are the questions we should be asking? We can teach humanities through such questions, through appreciative inquiry. And every day, we can take advantage of AI principles by turning a bad situation into a good one. For example, on teaching rounds, we've all dealt with this kind of situation where we have either a dysfunctional or challenging, difficult, if you will, patient and or family member, and we go through a tremendous stressful situation dealing with them, counseling them, talking to a zillion people on the phones, and then at the end of this process to sit down with them and say, you know what? That was an incredible process. What did we do? What worked? And what did we learn from this experience? Instead of sitting there, which the tendency usually is like, I hope I never have a patient like this or another family like this again, learn from that experience. We can all do that. And by doing that, by staying on the positive, by getting that glass to become, or cup becoming full, we are actually practicing AI. So to summarize, the poetic principle, I think, says it very nicely. This is not a brand new idea, positive thinking at all. Remember Winston Churchill, he said, the pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity. The optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. How can you disagree? So appreciative inquiry is really taking medical education in a bold new direction. And what you're going to find out there, hardly you know, but it's a bold new direction. So I thank you very much, and I'm happy to open up for questions. And if you would like, I know we have a few minutes, depending upon the interest, I would like to read to you one of those stories from the University of Virginia. Would that be okay? Okay. I love this one, all right? This is a student talking about staying in the moment. The first patient, this is her story, the first patient that ever hugged me bit me first. She wasn't even my patient. We had been paired up in teams of 2 in our physical diagnosis course to do our last patient interviews of the year. I had already interviewed my patient, but I was also supposed to observe my partner's interview. When we walked into the room, the patient was crying. The nurse standing over her said, "Go ahead and interview her now. It'll take her mind off what I'm doing." Okay. The patient had a traction device bolted to her leg. She had staples snaking from below her knee all the way up to her thigh. It was time to remove the staples. I had never seen anything like it. "You can interview me," she said to my partner, and then looking at me, "but only if she holds my hand." The patient answered questions through gritted teeth, squeezing my hand. You can imagine the staples coming out. Squeezing my hand until I could hardly feel it. After a particularly deep staple, she turned her head toward my hand and chomped down as hard as she could between my thumb and index finger. At that moment, I believe an aha moment, at that moment I had some idea of how much pain she was in. Her bite brought me back from thoughts of how cool the traction device looked, of how amazing it was that they were able to use a vein from her leg to save her foot, of how one wrong step on some rocks could leave you in a hospital looking like this. It brought me back to her, a 50-year-old mother of grown children who had already spent 2 weeks in the rehab hospital getting staples pulled out of her leg without any family around to comfort her. "I'm sorry," the patient said. "I'm usually the one that has to tell my grown kids to stop being such babies. If they could only see me now." When we finished the interview, she hugged me and thanked me. I hugged her back. She needed my hand. I needed her bite. That is AI. Thank you again.